First of all, thank you so much for the past 2 days. That is something that I never expected would actually happen. But I think for conclusive remarks, it's vital and it has to dominate the understanding of what is now following, hopefully, after the Parliamentary Assembly took this decision to pass the report and the recommendations, and today we had the conference, is that we need to include the families in everything we do. And this is the centerpiece and the piece from, or the point from which everything is starting to have a victim-centralized approach. Tarek Brown put it that way. He said, families live in a prison of silence. And I think these words describe what we've been discussing here behind all the technicalities of identification and the pragmatism with which we've approached this topic, because we want to find a solution. But this is what has been lying behind the whole time. We need to include families on how a database could be put into use. And Florian König put it that way. He said we need to break the silence of trust to authorities in countries of origin. And I think that this is the point, what the families expect from us as member states, to have an approach where they can turn to an organization that they actually can trust. They trust with their DNA and they trust with their most sensible data. And for this, we need a close cooperation with NGOs, globally in the countries of origin, together with international institutions. Second, we need the obligation in every state to identify. It should be made no difference where a person is coming from, what the suspected nationality is, or how the victim looks like. And therefore, member states should be obliged to identify persons, not just after a shipwreck, but we have heard from Maurice Titbalbin's the comparison to plane crashes. And I think this comparison overcomes this double standard that has, for good reason, been criticized in the last 2 days. And therefore, Morris put it that way, the non-identification should be the exception. And I think this is an expectation that we can uphold. Third, we need to understand that it is a collective task among member states. Resources must be used in a shared way, if necessary, in terms of cooling capacities or forensic personnel. But the DVI unit from Greek, the representative, also described the difficulties they had when it came to translators, and maybe another member state can provide translators to a mass casualty event to help in a situation of crisis. But that also means that focal points need to be appointed on a ministerial level, and they should participate in this network to actually bring it to life. And I think this can also be taken home to all member states, that those of you who are not an MP, ask your local MP or ask your government by the next occasion to act on this matter, to actually appoint a focal point in a ministry. And obviously no country should be doomed to deal with this alone, but this network can help sharing knowledge, organize support among each other, and ultimately it does help identify persons that are yet not identified. And fourth, and the last point, the database. Julia Black from the IOM Missing Migrants Project was highlighting the importance of data. And data from the member states, from individual actors, needs to be aggregated in a centralized database. Maybe Interpol might play a role in this, and each member state, and in each member state, we also need an assessment whether the legislation is allowing for data to be shared with such an international organization, or where changes should be made. I want to close first with the words of Batul, and then a few personal. Batul, Khadija said about her sister, she's not just a number in a report. And I've been using, personally, the numbers from the Missing Migrants Project and for the past 10 years. And this is the sentence that I always had to remember myself. It's not just a number. It's a person that likes ice cream, and it's a person that has a story and has a story that should be told. Personally, I want to thank you so much for coming. And when starting this report more than 2.5 years ago, I would have never imagined that this conference would actually take place. And in particular, there is an incredible amount of competence in this room. And I think we can and we have to put this into use. When I started in search and rescue, we had one principle. If we, civil society, can do this, send a ship on the Mediterranean and rescue people, then we can expect the same from all European states. Nothing less, but also nothing more. And the same applies to the identification. Expect from lawmakers to act on this. Encourage your governments to continue their efforts. And I think it's not an ideal, it's an expectation that no person is being forgotten. Thank you so much for coming.
So I guess it's my turn. I will repeat yourself because I came to the same conclusions as well. That it was a very rich conference with a lot of information and with all the relevant stakeholders around the table, which makes it quite unique, I would say. And as you put it also, as Batul said, and which will also remain with me, behind the numbers, there are human beings and there are families waiting to know about the fate of their relatives. And some other messages also stayed with me, like no state should be left alone in this challenge. International cooperation is needed, and what is needed is a collective political will of our member states. I also heard from words to action, and concrete action is needed. Some takeaways from that I will take with me. Each country have their own system, I understood. Each country have their own set of rules, their own legislation. But what is clear is that we should have an obligation. There should be an obligation to identify, to escape the vacuum of accountability, as one of the speakers put it. The second point is that a focal point, as you also mentioned it, Julian, a focal point should be appointed at ministerial level, that is under a ministry, in each of the 46 member states of the Council of Europe. This focal point should also coordinate between ministries, different national stakeholders. There is a need, from what I've heard, that there is proper communication channels put in place at the national level first, and then at the international level. To have exchange of information first at the national level, then to have this exchange of information at the international level. And I was thinking focal points. We already at the Council of Europe have, for example, a network of focal points on migration, meeting 3 or 4 times a year. So I was thinking if every country has a focal point for this, for missing migrants, these two, they could also meet in this international forum and exchange information. Families have to be part of the process from the very beginning, not as victims. That's what I have retained the most, not as victims, but as actors, as providers of information. And administrative obstacles were mentioned, and I'm particularly sympathetic to one, because I'm also suffering from this visa requirement. I mean, it's not easy to get a visa. Most of you maybe don't know what is it to ask for a visa and get a visa. So this visa requirement is really important if you want to go in a country where your relative disappeared. There has to be a system that allows the consulates to have an easier way of getting a visa. What I've also heard is that the families sometimes fearful to share information when they are in the country. Maybe they are irregular, they don't have any papers, so they are afraid of going and giving information to authorities. And there comes the role for civil society, which was mentioned as an intermediary by many speakers, an intermediary between the state authorities and the families. I also heard that the role of the human rights institutions should be acknowledged more, because some of them in some of our member states have mandates which are relevant in this field. Tools exist, that was repeated several times. Tools exist, standards exist, but they have to be implemented, so there has to be a collective wish, political will to implement it, but in a harmonized way. I've also heard that more resources and more flexibility are needed for forensic experts, doctors. Julian, you are a parliamentarian yourself, and you said it, parliamentarians have a key role to play in this regard. I was thinking that, for example, they could organize hearings in their countries, hearings to understand better what are the problems in each country, and then have an action accordingly. Finally, what I could say, my colleagues are going to prepare a toolkit for parliamentarians, in fact, that will help you, support you in your awareness-raising work, and also to bring this issue more in light. As I see it, it is not a subject which we talk about a lot in our member states. So you will get in 2025, Marie told me, a toolkit which will be designed for parliamentarians that you will be able to use. Thank you.